Good morning. The verse I'd like to share with everyone this morning is found in Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. A story that many have heard, but two verses that I always find are very interesting and are uh, very cutting and I don't know what the right word is to describe it. Just verses that remind me of something that we as Christians many times don't consider as much when we really ought to be thinking about this more than we do. Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Many people already know this story. Uh, King Darius of the Persian Empire decided to set Daniel uh, over the over three of the presidents over the kingdom. Uh, Not set him over them, rather, but Daniel was the first of the three presidents that were over the kingdom of Persia, and the other the other the other two presidents did not like that Daniel was the leader, and they wanted to get rid of him. They were jealous of his power. They wanted his power and wanted to get rid of him. So they tried to find some reason in their own law to uh, to try to force him out of his political office that the king had put him into, to try to make the king have a reason to take him out. But they kept looking and looking and looking and couldn't find anything. So finally, they had to say between themselves, the only way we're going to catch this guy is if we find something against him, either in his own law or between his law of his God and our law. Sorry. Anyway, they said they couldn't find anything in their own law against him, so they had to find something with his own law against him. And, well, we know how that story turned out. The the princes tried to get Darius to make a decree. Daniel got thrown in the lion's den because he would not obey the decree over God's law and his own uh, relationship with God. And then, when Daniel was saved from the lions, King Darius threw in the other princes who had convinced him to make this law, and decreed that Daniel's God would be the one to be worshipped in his kingdom. But anyway, verses 4 and 5 are what stick out to me. Even when Daniel's enemies wanted to find something against him in their own law, they couldn't. They couldn't find anything wrong with the man. They couldn't find anything that he had done wrong within their own law. So they decided the only way they could get him was to get him concerning the law of God, the law that he followed, the law of the Israelites and the Jews. And how can that be said of many of us Christians today? Can it be said of us Christians, if somebody were to investigate our lives, could it be said that these people could not find, if someone to investigate my life or your life as a Christian, would someone be able to say, I can't find anything wrong against this person according to our law? The only way I'm going to find something wrong against him is if I consider something about his own law. Can it be said that the Christians, that my only fault and your only fault is that we consider God's law above man's law? That when it comes to choosing God's law or man's law, we prefer to choose God's law and still obey what we can of man's law. That would be what Daniel did here. Daniel followed man's law until it came to the point that he had to choose between man's law and God's law. God's law tells us to follow man's law, but when it comes to a choice between the two, we as Christians know we are supposed to follow God's law. So can it be said of us, Christians, that our only fault is to consider God's law above man's law, and in choosing between the two, choose God's law above man's?